Did you know that Umbridge almost caught Sirius Black in the Gryffindor common room? If you're a fan of the books, then you know that the movies left a lot out, but do you remember all of those changes? I know that I didn't realize how much was really altered until I sat down and compared things scene for scene and page for page. So join me today as I uncover more than a dozen changes between the Order of the Phoenix book and movie in episode 68 of my series, Movies vs. Manuscripts. My name is Gibby and welcome back to Fact or Fantasy Harry Potter, a channel dedicated to talking about all things wizarding. If you're new here, this is my series where I go page by page and scene by scene through the books and movies and find all of the difference between the original and adaptation. So far, we've covered years 1 through 4 in Harry's life, and today we're diving into chapters 16 and 17 of the Order of the Phoenix. Full transparency, by the way, I originally was going to include chapter 18 as well, but when I got to writing the script, it was going to be like an hour-long episode, so I decided to split things up. So make sure to come back in a week or two for the next episode. Per usual, I'll cover all the changes across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's recap what actually happens in these scenes of the film, that way it's fresh on our mind for the analysis. Picking up with where we left off last week with Hermione suggesting that Harry teach them defense against the dark arts, the movie transitions to the Hogshead in Hogsmeade, where about 20 other students are gathering to hear what Harry has to say. After telling them that he's just had really good luck at surviving all of these years, he says that they just don't understand. And Hermione confirms that they don't, which is why they need someone to teach them. We then see everyone lining up to sign a paper committing to the new group, and Harry and the gang walking back to Hogwarts talking about how they need to find a place to hold their classes without being caught. Unfortunately for them, Umbridge is watching from above, and very soon after we see Filch putting up a new educational decree that states groups and committees and social clubs and things like that are no longer allowed at Hogwarts. And I know this seems abrupt, but that's where we're cutting things off for this week's scenes. Like I said before, I originally was going to do more than that, but then it ended up being way too long, so I had to reel it back in. So let's rewind back to chapter 16 and 17 and start our analysis with our character, timeline, and location changes. Starting with character differences, there are dozens that I could technically name, but we're just going to hit the main people in these chapters. Those people include Susan Bones, Zacharias Smith, Michael Corner, Terry Boot, Marietta Edgecombe, Katie Bell, Alicia Spinett, Angelina Johnson, Dennis and Colin Creevy, Lee Jordan, and a bunch of other students that I won't name but who get listed in the book. In total, there are about 25 members of the DA, but I don't think we see every single one of them in the movie. Plus, people like Zacharias Smith and Michael Corner actually talk in the movie, but they're unnamed and kind of ignored from that point forward, whereas in the book, we'll read more about them later. Now, other than those students, we're also missing a few other people in these scenes, notably Dobby, Snape, McGonagall, Grubbly Plank, Flitwick, Trelawney, Binns, Peeves, Mundungus Fletcher, and Victor Crumb. Now, Victor's not technically in anything, but he is mentioned by name for a very specific reason that we'll talk about in the plot changes. Oh, and technically we do see the Hogshead barman in the movie, but did you know that in the book he is Dumbledore's brother, Aberforth? Anyway, moving on to timeline, we don't have a big change yet because it's in the next episode that we'll see things really speed up. We're not to the DA versus Umbridge montage yet, but once we get there, things will speed up and the timeline is thrown way off. So we'll talk about that in the next episode. But now let's move on to locations, which has a decent amount missing as well. We don't see any of our normal classrooms like potions, history of magic, divination, herbology, or anything else. Also, there's a small moment in the library early on in the chapters. And of course, we're missing our normal Hogwarts locations like the Great Hall, the outdoor courtyard, the Gryffindor common room, and things like that. Now, before we go diving into the plot changes, I of course have to give my usual disclaimer that I can't go word for word through the dialogue, especially in today's case. So if you're wanting to relive these chapters word for yourself, then I highly recommend the audiobooks on Audible. If you're new, it's a great way to dive into the story, and if you've already read the books before, then it's an amazing way to relive your favorite scenes. So check out the link in the description below to claim your free trial, which helps support the channel at the same time. And speaking of supporting the channel, shout out to the legends Joshua, Timothy, RoboSteve, Drix, Maha, and the rest of my incredible Patreon and YouTube supporters who help make these videos possible every month. You guys are the best. Now with all of that out of the way, let's dive into our plot changes. To kick off our plot changes, we're actually rewinding a bit to a moment the movie skips over entirely. In the film, Hermione suggests that Harry teach them defense against the dark arts, and boom, the very next scene they're in the Hogshead putting the plan into action. But in the book, it's a lot more drawn out than that. Following her initial suggestion, Hermione actually keeps completely silent on the topic for 2 full weeks. During that fortnight, a lot happens. Harry's painful detentions with Professor Umbridge finally come to an end, leaving a faint white scar on the back of his hand. Ron completes several Quidditch practices without getting shouted at all, and all 3 of them successfully learn to vanish mice in Transfiguration, which for the boys is a big deal. It isn't until a wild, blustery evening at the end of September, while they're sitting in the library searching for potion ingredients for Snape, that Hermione finally broaches the topic again. Harry pretends to be super engrossed in a book about Asiatic antivenoms, but the truth is, he's secretly been planning lessons in his head this whole time. Because although he doesn't want to admit it, the idea of teaching others about the dark arts and how to defend from them is actually exciting to him. As Hermione tries to convince Harry to teach, she casually mentions that Krum told her that Harry knew how to do things that even he didn't, despite Krum being in his final year at Durmstrang. Naturally, hearing Krum's name makes Ron turn around so quickly he nearly cricks his neck. Hermione claims that her and Krum are just pen pals, but Ron mumbles under his breath that he thinks Krum wants to be a little more than pen pals. Ignoring Ron's jealousy, Hermione explains that since they're preparing to defend themselves against Voldemort, it is only fair to offer the chance to learn to anyone who wants to. Because originally, Harry actually thought that she was only referring to him teaching her and Ron, not everybody else. After Harry reluctantly agrees to hear people out, Hermione proposes that they use their upcoming Hogsmeade weekend in October to hold a secret meeting if anyone is interested, whispering that Umbridge would certainly not be happy if she found out what they were up to. And that brings us to our next change, which is that as they're actually heading out of the castle for that very Hogsmeade trip on Saturday morning, we get a quick little moment that the movie completely skips over. While the trio is queuing up in front of Filch, who is checking everyone's names against the permission list, the caretaker suddenly leans in and sniffs Harry. Obviously confused by this, Harry fills Ron and Hermione in on why Filch would be doing that, recalling a crazy story about dung bombs. If you remember from the last episode, we talked about how Harry went and sent a letter to Sirius up in the Owlery, and while he was there he ran into Cho and started talking to her. Well, while he was talking to Cho, Filch burst in, furiously claiming that he had received a tip-off that Harry was placing a massive order for dung bombs. Thankfully, Cho had backed him up and told Filch that Harry hadn't done that, saying that she saw Harry send a regular letter. After Harry is done telling Ron and Hermione about this story, Hermione finds the whole situation incredibly suspicious. She immediately starts wondering who exactly would have tipped Filch off with such a ridiculous rumor, planting the seed that Umbridge might be actively looking for an excuse to intercept Harry's mail. And put a pin in that because we'll see more about that later. Next, we finally arrive at Hogsmeade, and specifically the Hogshead pub. In the movie, we see the trio walk in, and it's definitely a bit run down, but it doesn't quite capture just how dodgy this place really is in the books. Hermione specifically chooses this pub because Hogwarts students rarely go there, making it the perfect spot to hold a secret meeting without being overheard, or at least she thinks so. But the atmosphere inside the Hogshead is pretty wild. Right away, Harry notices a very strong, distinct smell of goats, and the patrons are even weirder. Instead of a mostly empty room waiting for the students like the movie shows, they see a man at the bar whose entire head is wrapped in dirty gray bandages like a mummy, literally gulping some fiery liquid through slits in his wraps. There are also 2 hooded figures sitting by the window speaking in strong Yorkshire accents, and a witch sitting by the fireplace completely covered in a thick black veil that falls all the way to her toes. On top of the sketchy clientele, Harry gets a good look at the barman, a tall, thin, incredibly grumpy-looking old man with long gray hair and a beard who charges them 6 sickles for 3 extremely dusty bottles of butterbeer. The book specifically notes that this man looks oddly familiar to Harry, but he can't place it right in that moment. And obviously, as we talked about in the character changes, you know why Harry would recognize this person. It's because he is actually Albus Dumbledore's brother, Aberforth, and they look extremely similar. It's a great little detail that the movie skips over in favor of just rushing straight into the Dumbledore's army meeting. Also, a fun little detail here is the fact that there's a goat inside, both in the movie and the smell of goats is mentioned in the book, and that's because we learn later on that Aberforth has a weird affinity for goats, and I believe his Patronus is even a goat. I don't think J.K. Rowling ever explained the whole goat thing, but if anybody knows why that's such a big deal for Aberforth, drop it in the comments below. Moving further into the meeting itself, we have a really great character detail that the movie completely changed. If you remember the film version of this scene, Luna Lovegood is the one who speaks up and asks Harry if it's true that he can produce a corporeal Patronus. But in the book, it isn't Luna who asks this. It's actually a Hufflepuff girl named Susan Bones. When she asks, Harry immediately recognizes her last name and asks if she's related to Madame Bones. Susan smiles and confirms that Amelia Bones is her auntie. This is a brilliant little connection because, as we covered in earlier episodes, Madame Bones was the witch who oversaw Harry's disciplinary hearing at the Ministry of Magic over the summer. Susan explains that her aunt told her all about the hearing, and she just had to ask if it was really true that Harry could make a full stag Patronus. Harry, of course, confirms that he can, which leaves the rest of the students in the pub incredibly impressed. It's a small change, but I always love how the books interconnect the students with the wider wizarding world and the ministry politics like this. And that actually brings us perfectly to our next change, which happens right as the meeting is wrapping up. If you remember the movie, after Harry finishes talking, everyone just casually lines up to sign a piece of parchment committing to the new group. But in the book, it's not quite that simple. Before the parchment is ever brought out, Ernie Macmillan actually speaks up and boldly declares that learning defense from Harry is possibly the most important thing they'll do all year, even more important than their upcoming OWL exams. But the funny thing is, the moment that Hermione pulls out the parchment and explains that signing it means making a vow of silence to keep the secret from Umbridge, Ernie immediately hesitates. He gets cold feet, nervously pointing out that he is a prefect, and that it would be incredibly bad if a secret list like this was ever found. Hermione gets a little testy at this and promises that she obviously isn't just going to leave the list lying around for anyone to find. Thankfully, this is enough to reassure Ernie, and he goes ahead and signs. And I think a cool detail about this is that because Ernie is a prefect and he comes from a respected pureblood family, the rest of the students who were hesitant were basically waiting on his approval. The moment that he put his name down on the paper, though, everyone else feels comfortable enough to follow suit, including the ever-annoying Zachariah Smith signing at the very bottom. And again, I can't go through every single word of dialogue, so if you want to know more about Zachariah Smith, you're just going to have to read the chapters yourself, but just take my word for it, he's pretty annoying. Another fantastic detail omitted from this sequence revolves around the trio's walk back to the castle. In the movie, we see a whole group of students walking back together, and when Hermione brings up Cho Chang, we see a weird, jealous look from Ginny. The film heavily insinuates that Ginny is still interested in Harry, but in the book, only the trio is walking back together, and their conversation actually reveals the exact opposite about Ginny's love life. During their walk back to the castle, which by the way is only the trio walking, Hermione casually drops the bombshell that Michael Corner and his Ravenclaw friends only showed up to the meeting because Michael is actually dating Ginny. Naturally, Ron is completely outraged by this, practically gagging on his butterbeer and demanding to know when this happened. Hermione casually explains that they met at the Yule Ball and got together at the end of that year, and they kept it a secret because they knew Ron would completely overreact. When a shocked Ron points out that he thought Ginny liked Harry, Hermione pityingly shakes her head, explaining that Ginny actually gave up on Harry months ago. Hearing this makes a massive light bulb go off in Harry's head. He suddenly realizes that this is the exact reason why Ginny is finally able to talk normally around him, whereas for the past 4 years, she was always too nervous to even speak in his presence. It's a great bit of character development for Ginny that the movies completely ignore in favor of keeping her as the shy, pining fangirl for a little while longer. Speaking of keeping things a secret, by the way, the movie completely glosses over how Umbridge actually discovers this new group. In the book, it's eventually revealed that the heavily bandaged patron sitting at the bar was a wizard named Willie Wittershins, and he goes straight to Umbridge to report everything he overheard when Dumbledore's army met for the first time. I'm not going to get into exactly who Willie is right now because that actually comes up much later, so just tuck that information away because it's going to come up again in a future episode. Moving right along into the start of Chapter 17, we have a series of events that the movie completely ignores in favor of just having Filch nail a decree to the wall. In the book, the chapter begins on a beautiful Sunday with Harry and Ron hanging out by the lake, doing homework while Hermione magically knits clothes for the house elves. It isn't until Monday morning that they actually find a massive sign on the Gryffindor notice board posting Educational Decree number 24, not number 68 like the movie shows. This decree officially disbands all student organizations, societies, and teams. Obviously, this sends Ron into an absolute panic, and he immediately sprints up the spiral staircase toward the girls' dormitories to warn Hermione. But before he can make it to the top, on the 6th step, a loud klaxon-like alarm wails, and the stairs instantly melt into a smooth stone slide, sending Ron tumbling all the way back down to Harry's feet. Hermione eventually comes down and explains that the Hogwarts founders put an ancient enchantment on the stairs because they believed the boys were less trustworthy than girls, which is just a hilarious bit of Hogwarts lore that we never got to see on screen. Once they finally get a chance to talk about the decree, the boys are terrified that someone has already snitched on their secret meeting. However, Hermione firmly reassures them that no one could have confessed to Umbridge yet because she actually placed a secret jinx on the parchment everyone signed at the Hog's Head. She guarantees that if anyone betrays them, the jinx will make their face break out in spots so bad that it would make Eloise Midgen's acne look like a couple of cute freckles. Following that morning discovery of the decree, the movie also completely skips over the chaotic breakfast that ensues. In the book, as the trio sits down to eat in the Great Hall, multiple members of their newly formed group attempt to swarm their table in an absolute panic. Ernie Macmillan and Hannah Abbott try to rush over, but Hermione frantically mouths at them, "Later, we'll talk to you later," and aggressively gestures for them to sit down, knowing that a sudden gathering of all these specific students would immediately look suspicious to Umbridge. We also get a fun little callback to the earlier relationship reveal, as Ginny says that she'll go over to the Ravenclaw table to warn Michael and his friends. But the most stressful interaction at breakfast comes from Angelina Johnson. She approaches the table looking completely devastated, pointing out a crucial detail that the movie glosses over. The decree doesn't just ban secret clubs, it officially disbands all sports teams as well. This means the Gryffindor Quidditch team is no more, and they have to formally seek Umbridge's permission to reform. Angelina is so desperate that she literally begs Harry to keep his temper in check around Umbridge so they don't get banned permanently. A request that, knowing Harry, is definitely easier said than done. Moving on from that chaotic breakfast though, we have another major scene that was completely left out on the cutting room floor, and this one involves Hedwig. During a very boring history of magic lecture on giant wars with Professor Binns, Hedwig unexpectedly appears on the window ledge. Harry sneaks over to the classroom window and opens it so that Hedwig can hop inside, and as she does, he can see that she's holding her wing at a very odd angle. Realizing that she's injured, Harry fakes being ill so he can leave class and take her to Professor Grubbly-Plank. He ends up finding her inside the staff room alongside Professor McGonagall. Grubbly-Plank examines Hedwig with a monocle and takes her inside to heal her wing. But before Harry leaves, McGonagall hands him the detached scroll that Hedwig was holding, which simply reads, "Today, same time, same place." It's a coded message from Sirius, and McGonagall uses this moment to quietly but firmly warn Harry that all channels of communication in and out of Hogwarts are likely being monitored. It's a tense little moment that confirms Hermione's earlier suspicions about Filch in the mail, and it really ramps up the paranoia of the school year, which the movie mostly breezes past. Following that ominous warning from McGonagall, our next missing moment takes place down in the dungeons right before potions class. As the students are waiting in the corridor, Draco Malfoy loudly brags about how the Slytherin Quidditch team was already reinstated because Umbridge knows his father. He then goes on to insult Arthur Weasley and taunts Harry, claiming that the Ministry is going to cart him off to St. Mungo's, specifically the ward for peoples whose brains have been addled by magic. Now, while Harry is used to these taunts, this specific comment about St. Mungo's sends Neville absolutely wild with fury. Knowing that Neville's parents were tortured into insanity by Death Eaters and are currently residing in that exact hospital, Harry and Ron actually have to physically wrestle Neville backward to stop him from attacking Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle. And I should clarify that in this moment, Harry is the only one who knows about this because Neville still hasn't told anybody about his parents. Of course, right at that moment when Harry and Ron are wrestling Neville backwards, Snape opens the classroom door and sees the Gryffindor boys tangled up in a brawl and immediately docks 10 points from them for fighting. The unfairness continues inside the actual class, where Umbridge is sitting in the corner with her clipboard to inspect Snape. I mentioned in a previous episode that the movie actually showed a brief glimpse of this inspection way earlier, and this is where it really happens in the book. Harry is so distracted by watching Umbridge question Snape that Hermione actually has to physically grab his wrist to stop him from adding the wrong ingredients to his potion. Despite Hermione's help though, his potion still turns out a strange orange color instead of the correct turquoise, and Snape, who's already in a bad mood because of Umbridge, maliciously vanishes it with a wave of his wand, giving Harry 0 marks for the day and assigning him a corrective essay. Leaving the dungeons behind, our next omitted moment takes place up in the North Tower during a divination class. When Harry and Ron arrive, they find Professor Trelawney in an absolute hysterical rage. Harry immediately assumes that she must have just received the results of Umbridge's inspection because she is slamming copies of the Dream Oracle onto students' tables. She even throws a copy at Seamus and Dean and thrusts one into Neville's chest so forcefully that he literally falls right off his poof. She then spends the entire lesson tearfully yelling at the class, demanding to know if they think she's a substandard teacher. We then overhear her grumbling to Parvati Patil about how her 16 years of devoted service have been completely ignored, revealing that she has officially been insulted and placed on probation by the Ministry establishment. But now, to wrap things up for Chapter 17, we move out of the classrooms and into the evening. And our next major omission takes place back in Gryffindor Tower. First, the trio watches Fred and George successfully demonstrating their newly perfected puking pastilles to a cheering crowd. We literally read about Fred eating the orange half of a chew to violently vomit into a bucket, and then eating the purple half to instantly stop, while Lee Jordan lazily vanishes the mess with a quick spell. Even Hermione has to admit that she can't technically stop them from selling these things since it doesn't break any specific rules. But the real meat of this missing scene happens way past midnight when Sirius's head suddenly appears in the fireplace. Now, just to be clear, Sirius did show up in the fire earlier in the movie, but this specific conversation is an entirely different time. First of all, Sirius reveals that the heavily veiled witch they saw earlier in the Hog's Head was actually Mundungus Fletcher in disguise, keeping tabs on Harry for the Order. Sirius then passes on a very stern message from Mrs. Weasley, absolutely forbidding Ron from participating in their new secret defense group. But in classic Sirius fashion, he immediately follows that up by saying that he personally thinks it's an excellent idea, and even suggests that they use the Shrieking Shack to hold their meetings. However, the conversation gets cut incredibly short when Sirius suddenly vanishes from the flames. And right where his face just was, a stubby, short-fingered hand covered in ugly, old-fashioned rings burst through the fire, making wild scratching and grabbing movements. The trio immediately recognize it as Umbridge's hand, proving that she's monitoring the Floo network and Sirius just barely escaped. The trio then sprints out of the common room in sheer terror, and it's a massive, terrifying cliffhanger for the chapter that the movies just completely ignore. And although you wouldn't think it right now, this whole narrative of them talking to Sirius through the Floo network is actually a pretty big detail, and it's going to come up later on when Harry is checking where Sirius is during the climax of the story. So personally, I think the movie should have included a moment like this. But anyway, that wraps up all of our changes for this episode. It's not often that I have to cut things off retroactively, but this one really needed it. So if you feel like this episode was a little incomplete, it's because it kind of was. So make sure to come back for the next episode in a week or two to see the rest of the moments with Dumbledore's army, how they find the Room of Requirement, and them versus the Inquisitorial Squad. But for now, if you enjoyed the video, then please like and subscribe, as that greatly helps the channel. Also, you can check out past episodes that you've missed using the playlist linked in the description. Always remember that you are appreciated, you matter, and Jesus loves you. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.